When I first met Daniel, I thought I had found my forever person. He had that smooth charm that made you feel like the only one in the room. He knew how to make people laugh, how to make me feel safe, and how to convince me that he wasn't like anyone else I'd ever known. For years, I believed that. For years, I built my life around him, supported him through his career shifts, and trusted that the man who promised to protect me would never be the one to destroy me. But people change, or maybe they simply reveal who they really were all along. It began with little things: the late nights at the office, the unexplained charges on our joint credit card, the sudden distance that hung between us like fog. I tried to talk to him, tried to fix what I thought was broken. He brushed me off, told me I was imagining things. I wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than accepting that my marriage was slipping away. Then came the moment everything snapped. I found messages on his phone. He'd left it on the kitchen counter one night, open, unlocked. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was his arrogance. But what I saw shattered the last bit of denial I had. Texts with a woman named Alyssa, talking about weekend trips, about how I'd never suspect a thing. How I was too naive to see what's right in front of her. It was like reading a stranger's life, except it was mine. When I confronted him, Daniel didn't even try to deny it. He just stared at me coldly, as if I was the one inconveniencing him. He said things that would echo in my head for months afterward. "You're not exciting anymore. I've outgrown this marriage. You'll be fine." I remember that night vividly. The way my hands trembled, the way my chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. He packed a small bag, walked out of the house we'd built together, and didn't look back. The next day, I found out from a friend that he'd moved in with her. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was humiliated, heartbroken, and terrified. But somewhere deep inside me, something started to change. The pain burned so fiercely that it melted away everything weak in me. I stopped crying and started planning. Because while Daniel thought he was smarter than me, what he didn't realize was that I had always been paying attention. He filed for divorce 2 months later, expecting me to roll over quietly. His lawyer sent me a proposal that made my blood boil. According to him, I wasn't entitled to much, not the house I had helped pay for, not the savings I had contributed to, not even the retirement fund we built together. He painted a picture of himself as the sole provider, the successful husband, the magnanimous man who was kind enough to offer me a settlement. I signed nothing. Instead, I hired a lawyer of my own, a quiet, meticulous woman named Marissa who had seen her fair share of manipulative men try to cheat their wives out of everything. She listened to my story with calm, assessing eyes. When I finished, she said one thing that stuck with me: "We don't get angry, Grace. We get even." From that moment, I was done being the woman who cried on her kitchen floor. I gathered everything, every receipt, every bank statement, every message, every trace of his betrayal. I dug through years of records, quietly uncovering what Daniel thought I'd never find. The offshore account he'd opened in his company's name. The real estate purchase he'd made under his brother's LLC. The business trips that were really luxury vacations with Alyssa. Marissa and I built a case brick by brick, and when we were done, it was solid as steel. Daniel didn't know a thing. He thought I was still broken, still fragile. He called occasionally, smugly suggesting we settle things amicably. I played along, my voice calm, polite, even apologetic. Inside, I was building the storm that would destroy him. The day of the court hearing came. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy. I wanted to look composed, controlled, like the kind of woman who had nothing to hide. Daniel, on the other hand, arrived with his lawyer and his new girlfriend sitting in the back, Alyssa, dressed like she was attending a red carpet instead of a divorce hearing. He gave me that same arrogant smile he always did, as if he had already won. He whispered something to his lawyer, and they both laughed quietly. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, waiting. When the proceedings began, his lawyer tried to paint me as dependent, emotional, and financially clueless. She spoke about Daniel's sacrifices and career success, about how he had supported me while I found myself. I sat there, stone still, while inside I was a wildfire. Then Marissa stood up. And everything changed. She started with calm precision, dismantling their narrative piece by piece. She presented the records we'd gathered, each one a nail in Daniel's coffin. The hidden bank accounts, the property transactions, the falsified tax reports, the photos and receipts from trips he had claimed were business-related. Each revelation hit the courtroom like a hammer. Daniel's smug expression faltered. His lawyer's confidence drained by the minute. Alyssa's face turned pale in the back row. When Marissa finally handed over the printed messages between Daniel and Alyssa, detailing how he planned to hide assets before the divorce, the judge looked up sharply. "Mr. Parker," the judge said sternly, "you understand that what you've done constitutes fraud?" The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Daniel stammered, tried to explain, but the judge wasn't interested. The case turned against him so fast he didn't know what hit him. By the time it was over, the ruling was clear. I was awarded the house, a significant portion of his assets, and full control of our shared business holdings. Daniel was left facing not only financial penalties, but also an audit that would haunt him for years. He didn't look at me when the session ended. Alyssa had already slipped out, avoiding the reporters who were starting to gather outside, because yes, Marissa had leaked the right details to the right people. Daniel's reputation was finished. As I walked out of that courthouse, the sun hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The woman who had walked in that morning was not the same one who had spent nights crying on the floor. I was stronger, wiser. Later that evening, I sat alone in the house that was finally mine. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and let the quiet wrap around me. There was no more shouting, no manipulation, no games. Just silence. Beautiful, peaceful silence. Daniel had tried to outsmart me, but in the end, his arrogance was his downfall. He had underestimated the one thing he couldn't control, me. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something simple yet powerful. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes, it means rising so far above the people who hurt you that they can't even reach the place where you stand. That night, I smiled to myself and whispered, "Checkmate." When the court hearing ended that day, I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't even look back. I just walked out of that room with my chin lifted, the click of my heels echoing like the punctuation mark to a chapter of my life that had finally closed. Outside, the reporters were already buzzing, cameras flashing, microphones stretching toward me, shouting Daniel's name. I ignored them. My lawyer, Marissa, shielded me as we pushed through the noise. I got into my car, shut the door, and drove away, no destination in mind. Just away. The air outside was crisp, the kind of cool that cuts through everything fake. The kind that feels like honesty. I rolled down the window and breathed it in. For the first time in months, I could breathe without my chest tightening. But freedom, as I would soon learn, isn't quiet. It comes with ghosts, memories that sneak into your head when you least expect them. As I drove, I found myself replaying moments from the past, back when Daniel wasn't this stranger, when he used to laugh at my terrible cooking, when we'd spend hours planning the future. How had it gone from that to lawyers and betrayal and cold courtroom battles? Maybe the answer was simple. Some people can't stand equality. Daniel liked me most when I was small, when I needed his help, when he could swoop in like a hero. But when I started finding my own rhythm, when I got promoted at work, when I started earning more than he did for a while, something shifted. He became distant, sarcastic. I noticed the resentment in his jokes, the bitterness in his smiles. And every time I brought up how I felt, he twisted it into my fault. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. God, Grace, can you not make everything about you? He gaslit me so skillfully that after a while, I began to doubt my own reality. When he met Alyssa, his business associate, as he called her, I saw it. That spark in his eyes that he used to have for me. The way he started dressing better, going to the gym again, carrying that confident posture of a man who thought he'd found something new. And I was just the wife. The one who took care of the bills, who remembered birthdays, who made sure his mother got her medication on time. I became the invisible scaffolding holding up his life, until he decided he didn't need it anymore. But what he didn't know was that the invisible woman always sees everything. After that first court victory, I wasn't done. I could have walked away with the money, the house, and my pride, but that wasn't enough. Daniel had humiliated me publicly. He'd tried to destroy my reputation. And now he was trying to rebuild his image as the charming entrepreneur who had recovered from a messy marriage. I saw the posts online, the interviews he gave to small business magazines, painting himself as a self-made success story. So I decided to rewrite that story, the truth this time. Using the documents we'd collected during the case, I began compiling everything: his fake invoices, his shell accounts, the way he used company funds for personal luxuries. But I didn't release them myself. No, I was smarter than that. I sent the evidence anonymously to the state tax office and to the journalist who had written that glowing article about him. Within weeks, whispers started to circulate in his industry. A possible audit. Rumors of financial misconduct. His investors started pulling out. I didn't have to do a thing except sit back and watch as the empire he built on lies began to crumble from the inside out. I'd sometimes pass by his company's office on my morning runs. The sign outside used to gleam proudly. Now it was half faded. I never saw him, but I knew he'd see my name in the news every now and then. I'd been promoted to senior partner at my firm, featured in a local business publication under the headline "Resilience Redefined." Poetic, isn't it? Alyssa didn't last long. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she left once the money troubles began. Apparently, she had been siphoning money herself. Poetic justice, I suppose. The man who betrayed me got betrayed in return. The cycle completed itself beautifully. Months later, I got a call from Daniel. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Grace," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I could tell he'd been drinking. "You destroyed me." I stayed quiet. Let him speak. "I lost everything because of you. Are you happy now?" For a long moment, I just listened to his shallow breathing. Then I said softly, "No, Daniel. I'm not happy because of what I did. I'm happy because I survived what you did." He hung up. That night, I slept better than I had in years. In the months that followed, I started to rebuild, not just my career, but myself. I redecorated the house, took down every photo of us, painted the walls new colors. I adopted a dog, something Daniel never wanted because he didn't like the mess. The dog's name was Clover, a symbol of luck, new beginnings. She followed me everywhere, curling up beside me at night like a guardian. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Lighter, stronger, whole. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving a cafe downtown, I saw him. Daniel. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, exhausted. The confident man I'd once known was gone. He was talking to someone on the phone, his expression tense, desperate. I stood there for a moment, just watching. He didn't see me. And I realized I didn't need him to. My revenge wasn't about making him see what he'd lost. It was about me remembering what I'd gained, peace. The world moved on. He faded into the background of his own bad decisions, and I stepped into the future I had rebuilt with my own hands. A year later, when I sat on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city lights, I thought about everything, the betrayal, the courtroom, the lies. And I smiled, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about transformation. Because in the end, Daniel didn't lose because I beat him. He lost because I stopped needing him to win. I raised my glass to the night sky and whispered the words that had carried me through every dark day, every sleepless night. Never underestimate the woman who remembers everything. And I meant it. The day Daniel walked out of our house, I remember the sound of the door closing. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was soft, final. Like the sigh of something dying quietly. He didn't even pack everything, just a few suits, his laptop, and that stupid wristwatch he wore like it was a badge of superiority. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty glass of orange juice he'd left behind on the counter. It was still cold. I kept thinking, maybe he'll come back. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Our daughter, Emily, was at her friend's house that weekend, so she didn't see the fight that led up to it. She didn't see the way Daniel threw the papers at me, the divorce petition he'd already signed. "Just make it easy, Grace," he said. "Don't make this messy." As if he hadn't already shattered every piece of peace I had. The next few weeks were a blur of anger and numbness. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my chest tight, half expecting to hear his footsteps in the hall. But the silence that filled the house was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I stopped cooking. The bed felt too big. Even the dog wouldn't sleep in his old spot by the dresser anymore. Daniel didn't waste time parading Alyssa around. The first time I saw them together publicly was on Instagram. Someone had tagged him in a post at some tech networking event downtown, Daniel with his arm around her waist, smiling like he'd never known pain. The comments were filled with compliments. Power couple. So inspiring. Power couple. That one made me laugh out loud. Because I had been there through the late nights when he was broke and anxious. I was the one bringing him coffee at midnight while he worked on client proposals. I was the one paying rent with my salary when his startup didn't make money for 2 years. But people only see the end results, never the woman who helped build it. It was in that moment, scrolling through those fake smiles, that I decided I wouldn't just move on. I'd rise. I started small. I began journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. Every night, I'd write about what had happened that day, not just to remember but to release. I joined a women's support group for those going through divorces. That's where I met Erica, a tax attorney who became my closest friend through the whole ordeal. She had a way of turning pain into strategy, and she told me something I'll never forget. Revenge isn't loud, Grace. It's meticulous. Quiet. It's the art of making them underestimate you until it's too late. That stuck with me. By the time Daniel filed to divide our assets, I had already assembled a quiet army: Marissa, my lawyer, Erica for financial guidance, and a forensic accountant named Sam, who could find a penny hidden in a haystack. What Daniel didn't know was that his arrogance would be his undoing. He tried to hide assets through dummy accounts, funneling money into business expenses. He thought he was clever because on paper, he looked broke. But Sam dug deeper. He found a series of fake invoices, cash transfers to Alyssa's personal accounts, and unreported investment income. Every time Daniel thought he'd outsmarted me, I was already 3 steps ahead. The day we presented the evidence in court, Daniel's expression was priceless. For once, he didn't look confident. He looked small, cornered. Alyssa sat behind him, her face pale. The judge reviewed everything in silence before finally saying, "Mr. Turner, this looks like deliberate concealment of assets." Marissa leaned over to whisper, "You've just won, Grace." But I didn't smile. Not yet. When the judgment came, the court awarded me not only my rightful share, but a significant portion of the company we had built together. Daniel was ordered to pay penalties for falsifying documents. His reputation in the business community took an immediate hit. The local paper ran a short piece titled, "Consultant Accused of Financial Misrepresentation." Just 1 paragraph long, but enough to damage him. A week later, I saw Alyssa's name removed from the company website. Daniel had finally lost the one thing he valued most: control. Still, even after all of that, I didn't feel the thrill I expected. Maybe that's what people don't understand about revenge. It's never as simple as winning. It's quieter, more reflective. You don't celebrate. You exhale. You finally stop shaking. You realize you're not the same woman who once begged to be heard. Months passed, and I started focusing on myself again. I began therapy. I redecorated the living room, painted the walls a soft sage color, replaced every trace of his existence. I signed up for cooking classes, learned to make dishes I loved without worrying about his complaints. On weekends, Emily and I went hiking or stayed in watching movies. She was growing up fast, perceptive, and protective. One night, she asked me, "Mom, do you hate Dad?" I paused for a long time before answering. "No, honey," I said softly. "I don't hate him. I just finally stopped loving the version of him that never existed." She nodded, as if she understood more than her age should allow. Then came the night he tried to contact me again. It was almost a year later. I was having dinner with friends when my phone buzzed, a voicemail from Daniel. His voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Grace, please. I need to talk to you. They're investigating me. I can't do this alone." I deleted the message. He called again the next week. Same desperation. Different tone. "Grace, we can fix this. We can make it right. I was stupid. Please." I blocked his number. I didn't need closure anymore because I already had it. His downfall wasn't about me destroying him, it was about him finally facing the consequences he'd avoided all his life. A few months later, I ran into one of his old colleagues at a networking event. She mentioned Daniel was selling his house, trying to move to another state for a fresh start. She said he'd lost most of his contracts and that Alyssa had filed for bankruptcy after their company went under. I listened quietly, sipping my drink, not showing an ounce of emotion. But inside, there was peace. One evening, sitting alone on my balcony with the city lights stretching out before me, I thought about everything: the betrayal, the lies, the courtrooms, the long nights of crying when I thought I'd never stand again. And I smiled. Not because of what happened to him, but because of who I had become. I wasn't the wife begging to be loved. I wasn't the woman living in someone else's shadow. I was Grace Turner, independent, unshakable, alive. Sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. Sometimes it's the quiet strength of walking away with your dignity intact while they burn in the mess they created. A month later, I received an invitation to speak at a women's conference in Chicago about resilience and rebuilding after divorce. As I stood on that stage, looking at the crowd of women, some broken, some healing, some strong, I realized that this was my true victory. Turning pain into purpose. I told them my story, not the legal details, not the dirty parts, but the truth that mattered. That no one can truly outsmart you if you know your worth. When I finished, the applause was overwhelming. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the ghost of Daniel anywhere near me. The night ended with me standing in front of the hotel mirror, touching up my lipstick. My reflection looked calm, proud, radiant. I whispered to myself, "You did it, Grace. You won. Not against him, but for yourself." It's strange how silence can be both a comfort and a curse. After everything that happened, there were nights when I would sit on the balcony of my apartment, the one I bought with my share of the settlement, and just listen. No arguing. No tension. No Daniel. Just the hum of the city and the whisper of wind through the trees below. But the peace didn't come overnight. For months after the court case ended, I'd wake up startled, half expecting him to be beside me again, his phone glowing with messages he'd claim were work-related. It took time to unlearn the reflex of doubt, to stop questioning myself for everything that went wrong. One evening, I got a call from Erica, my friend and confidant, the one who had guided me through the worst of it. "Grace," she said, her voice tight with curiosity, "you won't believe this. Check the business news." I opened the link she sent and froze. There it was, Daniel's company, Turner and Company. Consulting, under federal investigation for tax evasion and financial fraud. The very same documents Sam had uncovered for my case had apparently triggered a deeper look by the IRS. His name was in every headline. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part felt nothing. It was almost anticlimactic, because I'd already detached from him so completely that watching him fall was like seeing a stranger's story unfold. Still, there was justice in it. Real, undeniable justice. Over the next few weeks, snippets of news continued to trickle in. A former client had sued him for breach of contract. His business partners had withdrawn. Alyssa had reportedly left him, taking what little she could. I heard through the grapevine that he was living in a small apartment in downtown Boston, trying to rebuild what he'd destroyed. But what struck me most was the irony. The man who once accused me of being too emotional was now unraveling emotionally himself. His arrogance had been replaced by panic, his calculated charm by desperation. One afternoon, I was walking out of a cafe when I saw him across the street. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. His tailored suits had been replaced by wrinkled shirts. His hair was unkempt, his face pale. He spotted me, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. He hesitated, then started to cross the street toward me. My heart rate picked up, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief that after everything, he still had the audacity to approach me. "Grace," he said, his voice low, almost broken. "Please, can we talk?" I stared at him. For a second, I saw the ghost of the man I once loved, the one I cooked for, cried for, believed in. But he wasn't that man anymore. Maybe he never was. "There's nothing left to say, Daniel," I said quietly. "You made your choices. Now you're living with them. He reached out, but I stepped back. You don't understand, he murmured. They're coming after me for things that weren't even my fault. I just need help. I finished for him, cutting him off. You needed help when you were hiding money behind my back. You needed help when you were lying in court. You needed help when you were parading her around like a trophy. But that wasn't about needing help, Daniel. That was about power. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time, he seemed genuinely lost. I almost pitied him. Almost. Good luck, I said simply, and walked away. That night, I wrote about the encounter in my journal. My handwriting was steady, calm. I realized that seeing him that way didn't ignite the old anger anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. He had dug his own grave, one lie at a time. In the following months, my life began to rebuild itself piece by piece. I took a position as a project manager at a firm that valued my skills. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, honest, and peaceful. I bought a little beach house outside the city, a place where Emily and I could escape on weekends. One summer afternoon, as the ocean breeze swept through the open windows, Emily turned to me and said, "You're smiling more these days." I laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess I am." "You're free now, Mom," she said. "That's what it looks like." She was right. Freedom wasn't just about being away from Daniel. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself that he had silenced, the laughter, the spontaneity, the confidence. I began to paint again, something I hadn't done since college. I hosted dinners for friends, filled my home with warmth and laughter. Slowly, the shadows receded. Then, unexpectedly, love found me again. It started with a friendship. Mark was a colleague, kind, patient, and nothing like Daniel. He never tried to dominate the conversation or make me feel small. He listened. Really listened. When we first went out for coffee, I was cautious, even distant. But he never pushed. He just showed up, day after day, in quiet, steady ways. One night, after a charity gala, we walked along the riverfront, the city lights reflecting off the water. He took my hand gently and said, "You don't have to be afraid of being loved again, Grace." I didn't answer right away. The part of me that had been shattered years ago still hesitated. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't fear, it was trust. Weeks turned into months, and the relationship grew naturally. Emily liked him. My friends liked him. Most importantly, I liked who I was around him, lighter, real, unapologetically myself. One evening, we were having dinner at my place when the news came on. The anchor mentioned Daniel Turner by name. He had been sentenced to 2 years for tax fraud and obstruction of justice. Mark glanced at me carefully, waiting for my reaction. I smiled faintly, stirring my wine. "Justice," I said simply. He reached across the table, touched my hand, and said, "Then maybe now you can finally close that chapter." I nodded. "It's already closed." But that night, when I was alone, I took out my old wedding ring. I had kept it tucked away in a jewelry box, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of everything I'd survived. I walked outside to the edge of the shore, the moon high and bright, and tossed it into the sea. The water swallowed it in seconds. It was over. For good. Years later, I published a memoir, not a tell-all, but a story about resilience, rebuilding, and reclaiming self-worth. It was called The Quiet Rebellion: How I Took Back My Life. It became a modest success, especially among women who had lived through betrayal and divorce. Every so often, I receive letters from readers saying, "Your story gave me courage." And that's when I know my revenge wasn't just personal, it became a message. That strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's just choosing yourself. One evening, I stood on the stage of another conference, looking out at hundreds of faces. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman crying on her kitchen floor. The applause faded, and I spoke the words that had guided me through everything. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about making them pay. It's about showing them they never had the power to destroy you. The crowd rose to their feet, and in that moment, I didn't see Daniel's shadow anymore. All I saw was light. And as I left the stage, I realized that this peace, this confidence, this quiet triumph, was the victory I had been chasing all along. Months after Daniel's sentencing, life had finally settled into something that felt normal. My days were filled with small, ordinary joys: the smell of coffee in the morning, Emily's laughter echoing from the kitchen, Mark's soft humming as he cooked. For so long, I had lived in survival mode, constantly bracing for another blow. Now, for the first time in years, I could breathe without fear. But sometimes, peace feels too quiet. There were nights when I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how everything had unfolded. Justice had been served, yes. But the echoes of betrayal don't disappear overnight. I still remembered the way Daniel used to look at me when he lied, how convincing he could be, how he made me doubt my own mind. I had spent years walking on eggshells for a man who thrived on control. That kind of conditioning doesn't vanish easily. Therapy helped. It took me months to admit I needed it, but when I finally did, it changed everything. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, was patient, but direct. "Grace," she said one afternoon, "you keep talking about him as if he still has power over you. What if you let that go?" The question lingered. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself, really looked. There were faint lines around my eyes, a few new ones near my lips. But there was something else too: strength. The kind that comes from surviving something that was meant to break you. In the months that followed, I stopped flinching at the sound of my phone. I stopped replaying arguments in my head. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Slowly, I realized that forgiveness didn't mean excusing what Daniel did. It meant freeing myself from his shadow. Then one day, a letter arrived. It was in my mailbox, handwritten, with no return address. My stomach sank the moment I saw his handwriting. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I could have thrown it away. I should have. But curiosity, or maybe closure, made me open it. The letter began simply: "Grace, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need to say it anyway. I've lost everything. The business, the money, the house, even Alyssa. She left when she realized what I really was. I keep thinking about the things I said in court, the way I tried to destroy you. I told myself it was just business, just strategy. But it wasn't. It was ego. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm sorry. Daniel." I read it twice. The words should have stirred something in me: anger, vindication, maybe pity. But they didn't. It felt like reading the final chapter of a book I'd already finished. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes, it's simply knowing you've moved on. That night, Mark and I had dinner on the patio. The air smelled like jasmine and salt. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the water. "You okay?" he asked, noticing the quiet in me. I nodded. "I got a letter today. From him." He set down his fork and reached for my hand. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really," I said, and then after a pause, "I think that's the point. I don't need to anymore. He smiled, and there was no judgment in it. Just understanding. That's what I loved most about him. He never tried to fix my past. He just made the present safe enough for me to exist in. A few months later, something remarkable happened. My memoir, The Quiet Rebellion, was optioned for a small independent film adaptation. When I first heard the news, I laughed in disbelief. Who would want to make a movie about me? I asked Mark, half joking. Someone who sees what I see, he said simply. A woman who refused to be erased. The production took nearly a year, and while I wasn't directly involved in writing the script, the director consulted me often. She wanted authenticity, the emotional truth, not the dramatics. Watching an actress portray my younger self was surreal. There were moments during filming when I'd have to step outside and take a breath. It wasn't easy seeing the manipulation, the courtroom battles, the tears all recreated on screen. But it was cathartic. When the film premiered, it didn't make millions, but it made an impact. Women came up to me after the screening, some crying, some silent, all with the same look, recognition. They knew what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, betrayed. One woman, probably in her 60s, hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for showing that revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's just living better." Her words stayed with me, because that was exactly what I had learned. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reconstruction of self, of peace, of purpose. Years passed. Emily went off to college, majoring in psychology. "I want to help women like you, Mom," she told me once. Women who forget how strong they are. I couldn't have been prouder. Mark and I got married 2 years after that, in a small ceremony on the beach. Nothing fancy, just close friends, family, laughter, and sunlight. When I said my vows, I didn't promise forever. I promised honesty, partnership, and respect. I promised to never lose myself again in love. After the ceremony, while everyone danced, I slipped away for a moment to stand by the shore. The same sea that had swallowed my wedding ring years ago. The waves lapped at my feet, gentle and cool, as if reminding me that time moves on, that pain fades, that new beginnings are possible. A breeze carried laughter from behind me, my daughters, my friends, Mark's. I smiled, and in that instant, I felt it, complete, unshakable peace. Later that year, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Daniel had been released from prison. He was working odd consulting jobs, mostly under someone else's name. He lived quietly, alone. There was no bitterness in me when I heard it, only a strange, detached sympathy. He was a cautionary tale now, a man who lost everything because he couldn't bear to lose control. Sometimes, life delivers the justice you don't have to seek. One evening, sitting on my porch with a cup of tea, I thought about all of it. The lies, the courtroom, the fear, the rebuilding, the forgiveness. It struck me how every painful step had led me here. How every betrayal had stripped away what wasn't meant for me. If I could speak to the woman I used to be, the one crying in the kitchen, holding on to a love that was already gone, I would tell her this: you will survive. You will rebuild. And one day, you'll thank yourself for walking away, not because you wanted to hurt him, but because you finally chose yourself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky gold and crimson, I felt a quiet sense of closure. My story wasn't one of loss anymore. It was one of reclamation. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all, not his destruction, but my peace. It's strange, looking back, how quiet the end of a marriage can sound. After all the shouting, the legal battles, the tears, the betrayals, silence becomes both foreign and holy. The first night Daniel was gone, I sat in the living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. It was almost unnerving. For years, I had lived in chaos, where every word I said could trigger a fight, every glance could be twisted into something ugly. And now there was only calm. But healing isn't a straight road. There were days I felt powerful, rebuilding, breathing, even smiling again, and others when loneliness hit me like a wave. You spend years with someone, even a toxic person, and part of your identity begins to blur into theirs. When that person is gone, you're forced to relearn who you are outside of the shadows. One night, after putting Emily to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through old photos I'd never deleted. Weddings, vacations, parties, all the moments that had once seemed perfect. In every picture, I saw a woman smiling too hard, eyes slightly too wide, trying to convince herself she was happy. I closed my phone and whispered to the empty room, "You deserved better." The next morning, I got up early and went for a run. The air was cold enough to sting, but I liked it. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd lost in compromise. When I stopped by the coffee shop afterward, the barista smiled. "You're glowing today," she said. I laughed softly. Maybe I finally am. I started volunteering part-time at a women's shelter downtown, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to do something that mattered. The stories I heard there were heartbreaking, but also familiar. Different details, same wounds. The women would talk about gaslighting, financial manipulation, being isolated from friends. It was like hearing echoes of my past self. I listened, held hands, reminded them they weren't crazy. In helping them, I found pieces of my own healing. One evening, as I was leaving the shelter, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Grace," a voice said. "Yes. This is Detective Lawson. We've received word that Daniel tried contacting you through a third party. Has anyone reached out?" My heart sank. "No, not directly." "Good. If he does, let us know immediately. He's under probation restrictions. He's not allowed to communicate with you or your family." I thanked him and hung up, my hand trembling slightly. For a moment, the past felt dangerously close again. But then I reminded myself, he couldn't hurt me anymore. A few days later, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "I need to explain." I didn't open it. I blocked the address instantly. That was my line in the sand. Daniel's words no longer had power here. Instead, I poured that unease into something productive, my book. Writing had always been therapeutic for me, but now it became survival. I sat down each night and bled onto the page. Every chapter stripped away shame, guilt, and fear. I wrote about manipulation in marriage, about how love can turn into a weapon when one person wields control. I wrote about courtrooms and lawyers, about the look on Daniel's face when he realized he'd lost. And I wrote about finding peace, not through revenge, but through justice. When The Quiet Rebellion finally published, I didn't expect much. But emails began pouring in, hundreds, then thousands, from women across the country. Some said the book gave them courage to leave their abusers. Others said it made them feel seen. One message stood out, "Grace, you don't know me, but your story saved my life. I was ready to give up, but your words made me believe I could start over. Thank you." I cried reading that. For years, I'd felt powerless under someone else's control, and now my voice had power. A few months later, a major talk show reached out to interview me. I almost said no. The idea of going on national television, reliving everything, terrified me. But Mark encouraged me. You don't owe the world your pain, he said. But if sharing it helps someone else escape theirs, maybe it's worth it. So I went. The cameras, the lights, the audience, it was surreal. The host asked me about Daniel, about the trial, about the revenge that had gone viral online. I told her, calmly and clearly, my revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about reclaiming my life. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is peace. The audience applauded. And in that moment, I realized I'd become the woman I needed back then. The one who believed in her worth, who refused to stay small. After the show, a producer approached me about turning my story into a limited series. I agreed, under one condition, that it wasn't turned into some dramatic, crazy ex-wife narrative. I wanted it real. The quiet kind of power. The kind that sneaks up on you. As production began, I visited the set often. Watching the actress play me was strange. She was younger, but she had that same cautious hope in her eyes I'd once carried. The first time she filmed the courtroom scene, I had to step outside. I stood there, hands trembling, breathing in the cool air. Mark came out a few minutes later, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. You okay? Yeah, I said softly. I just didn't realize how strong I was until I saw someone else pretending to be me. The show premiered to critical acclaim. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about resilience. The final episode ended with the line I'd written myself. She didn't rise from the ashes to burn the world. She rose to light her own way. After that, life slowed down again in the best way. Mark and I moved into a smaller house near the coast, the kind with wildflowers along the fence and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Emily visited every few weeks, bringing stories from her classes and pictures of the therapy group she was interning with. Watching her thrive was my proudest joy. One summer evening, years later, we all sat outside watching the sunset. The sky was painted in soft gold and pink, waves rolling gently in the distance. Mark handed me a glass of wine and smiled. Do you ever think about how far you've come? I looked out at the sea, the same sea that had once witnessed my heartbreak, and said, every single day. He nodded, then leaned in and kissed my forehead. You turned pain into purpose, Grace. That's real strength. I smiled faintly. Maybe that's what revenge really means. Not getting even, just living better. Later that night, when the world was quiet, I found myself journaling again. Not for a book, not for the public, just for me. I wrote about peace, forgiveness, growth, and how the heart learns to trust again. I realized that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer needing the past to justify your worth. Before I turned out the light, I whispered to the dark, I made it. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it.